I wanted to tell you guys about a problem that I had with this RV, how I figured it out, and how I saved myself potentially thousands of dollars of work that might not have even been done. It's really hard to say at this point. I'm supposed to have a conversation with the service manager tomorrow about it because it's pretty clear and obvious once you crawl underneath the vehicle. And not to mention the fact that I asked them 3 times to look at this, but they simply failed to do so. The problem I had with this unit is a vibration at highway speeds, especially when decelerating. So let's crawl underneath here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, the vibration I had with this unit, it sounded like I was riding the rumble strips on the side of a highway. It was especially noticeable between 60 and 70 miles per hour whenever I was decelerating. Now, let's take a closer look at this drive shaft here. Here's the back of the transmission. We have a very short drive shaft piece. It's basically a one-piece drive shaft with a slip yoke in the middle to compensate for a little bit of movement there. And then we have U-joints on either end with caps that hold them into place. And up front is a differential. Now, the thing to keep in mind is the differential does not move. The differential ride height does not change. It may go up and down a little bit over bumps, so the differential might move around a little bit, but it doesn't move near as much as the rest of the motorhome does. Now, the thing to keep in mind is the engine and transmission is bolted to the frame of your motorhome. The frame of the motorhome can be adjusted height-wise with these airbags here, the air ride suspension. If you're starting to get what I'm saying here, this end of the drive shaft right here, this end can move up and down according to the ride height that you select with your airbags. And of course, when you're going down the road, you go down a hill or you hit a bump, this will move a little bit. On the other hand, the differential that the wheels are connected to here, this axle, this does not move up and down with the air suspension. So what happens is, if your air suspension ride height is not set correctly or is not maintaining the correct height, this end of the transmission will sag down along with the whole frame of the RV. But the drive shaft stays in place and does not move. This causes what we call incorrect angle of the drive shaft. If you have too great of an angle on your drive shaft here, this will cause a vibration at high speeds. You won't notice anything at lower speeds, but as this drive shaft starts to change in angle, if the angle gets too great between the transmission and the axle, this will cause a vibration, and it can be very hard on transmission and differential components. It's not good. You don't want to keep pushing it and keep driving it if you're feeling that. And this is exactly what I was feeling. And the cause was the ride height was incorrect. Now we need to move on to why was the ride height incorrect. The driver's side of this vehicle here, we have our little ride height rod. This is connected to ultimately the rear drive axle. And this determines how high the axle is sitting, okay? The rod runs up here to this blue air control valve. Here's another view of the air control valve. You have air pressure that comes in, and then this valve determines how much of it goes to the airbag. As the frame moves up and down, this rod moves accordingly. I can move it a little bit there. See that? Not too much. But it will move accordingly as the vehicle changes ride height. And what this does is it maintains your set ride height so that it adjusts accordingly. It's great for towing trailers, if you have heavy loads, just another benefit of air suspension. However, if something fails here, this can cause the ride height to be incorrect. And as you can see, this rubber bushing right here is what failed on my unit. I basically took a bunch of Scotch tape here and taped it up temporarily just to get it back to the spot here so I could park it and not have to worry about damaging the differential or the transmission while I drove it back to storage and waited for the part to arrive. So next what I did was I dumped the air suspension, which in other words deflated the airbags. You can see they're sitting lower now, in order to simulate what the drive shaft looked like before I made this fix. Now, as you can see, the transmission is way down here, but the differential is still way up there. And that's because my ride height rod, the rubber bushing, had broken off of the top. That's the part that I taped up in order to fix it temporarily. When it broke off, the ride height was sitting all the way down like you see now. And as you can see, this puts a really big angle on that drive shaft. I know it doesn't look like too terribly much, but for a drive shaft's sake and wanting to prevent vibration, this is definitely a problem. This is the problem that I had, and this is what I asked the shop to check 3 times, but I was told in the end that they looked at it and the ride height is great. There's no problems. So there's a serious problem here. So what did the shop end up telling me the problem was? The service advisor from the shop that I had this RV at called me back and said the rear differential needed to be removed and overhauled because that was the problem. When in reality, all I needed was this piece right here. Took all the Scotch tape off, which actually did a remarkable job of holding it in place. Now we can clearly see where the problem is. How do we adjust the ride height? Primarily by loosening this clamp here and simply sliding the elbow up and down on the rod. That's how you adjust your ride height. And again, there are specs for it. I don't have the specs on me right now, but I want to just get it to the point where this drive shaft is level and I don't have that vibration due to this drive shaft angle being so great. In order to raise the suspension up again, we'll have to start the chassis engine. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to guesstimate where this ride height should be, and I'm just going to do that by putting this in the same position that it was before I took the old one off. And then this arm was about, let's say it was about right here or so, enough to make that straight up and down. So I'm just going to get this finger tight just to hold it in place, and this won't move on its own. It's just snug enough. But once I figure out where I want my ride height to be, then I'll tighten that clamp up. And I'll come back with a wrench, tighten this jam bolt up here, and we'll be good. But for now, let's go start the engine, build up some air pressure, and see if we fix our ride height. And we'll start it up here. These gauges will start to climb as air pressure builds. There we go, the alarm is off, and our low air pressure warning lights are off. So let's go back and see what the ride height is doing. Do you see the bags going up? So this is a big difference compared to how the drive shaft used to look. It's still not perfectly straight, but this is a good ride height for this vehicle, and I think with that little bit of angle we'll be okay. Of course, we'll wash our hands first. Yeah, got some Dawn dish soap there. It's great for the grease. Not perfect, but a lot better. So I went out and took the RV for a drive after I fixed the ride height, and it drove perfectly smooth. No vibrations, no issues whatsoever. It felt brand new, like it should. And this chassis only having 50,000 miles on it, with as heavy duty as these components are, it's got tons of life left in it. But I wanted to follow up with what happened between me and the shop after they tried to sell me this thousands of dollars worth of work that this thing didn't even need. I actually ended up talking with the service manager, and the service manager actually really saw my point of view with this issue. He agreed that the ride height issue definitely should not have been missed, and they ended up refunding me all the money that I paid them to take a look at it for that issue, which was about $400. So I'm glad that they did the right thing and acknowledged that they made a mistake by missing that. I still can't believe that they missed it, especially after documenting in the story on that RO that they checked all the suspension components, which they clearly didn't. But I'm glad they did the right thing. They refunded me my money. I ended up fixing it myself. You know, it's like they say, if you want something done right, do it yourself. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.